Just a moment. Thank you so much for being here. All right. Welcome to Bridge Elections FAQ, a live discussion where our reporters answer your questions about the 2024 election. I'm Isabel Lohman, the education reporter at Bridge, Michigan. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan news outlet. Today we have Capitol reporters Jordan Hermany, Simon Schuster, and data reporter Mike Wilkinson here to answer your questions. We're going to talk about a lot of things. We've got the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. We have the Michigan economy, and we have interesting information about what voters and polls are saying after the presidential debate from last week. We're also going to answer your questions. So if you have a question, you can throw it in the chat and we'll get to them later in the discussion. We want you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you never miss a show. Let's get started. So the FBI is investigating an assassination attempt into former President Donald Trump that happened over the weekend. Trump said he was safe and that he will never surrender, and he's expected back in Michigan this week. What's next?
Yeah, so I think that this really epitomizes the historic and unprecedented nature of this election season. This is the second assassination attempt, if Secret Service reports are correct, as they're continuing their investigation. It was seen against the former president in just a couple of months here. And while it's not yet clear whether any shots were fired, Trump was playing golf on this golf course, and Secret Service agents saw a rifle barrel poking out of a hedge there, bushes at the periphery of the golf course, and later detained a man who's appearing in federal court today. And Trump is going to be here on Tuesday. Campaign source says that the planned town hall event in Flint, Michigan is still on schedule. And you also note that Trump appeared in Grand Rapids July 20th, which was also his first public rally after the first assassination attempt against him in Pennsylvania. And so things are just continuing to move along here. The fact that, we've seen these two momentous historic events really and an uptick in political violence, and that we're just continuing along with the campaign season really speaks to, I think, the nature of the political climate that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, Mike, wasn't there some interesting data that came out of after the first assassination attempt? How did voters see Trump after that?
Well, Simon just mentioned the historic nature of this campaign. I mean, we had something else happen just right after that last attempt, and that was the sitting president getting out of the race. And just 2 days after he was shot, there was the Republican National Convention, which he showed up with a bandage on his ear and rallied the troops for 3 days. And at that point, he was ahead in the polls, both nationally and in Michigan. Not by a lot, but he was. So it's kind of hard to say which event or which aspect of his campaign was what was propelling him to the lead, but he was in the lead. It was then, just a week later, the president stepped down, Harris became the nominee, and the race has flipped since then, although it's still so narrow that, it's a toss-up in the state in most of the battleground states.
You mentioned it's a toss-up. We're in a swing state, and we expect a lot of visitors this week. Trump and Harris are both going to be here this week. J.D. Vance is also going to be here, and we're just 10 days out from when absentee ballots will be mailed to voters. What do candidates still need to communicate to Michigan voters?
I mean, they're pretty much sticking to what their bread and butter is right now. The Trump camp, from what we've seen, has been pretty adamant about routinely stressing and repeatedly stressing concerns with immigration, inflation, things of that nature, crime. That's been where their bread and butter has been out for a lot of their rallies. And on the flip side, the Harris campaign's bread and butter has mostly surrounded abortion and the concept of coming together, of rejecting political divisiveness. So if there's anything that still needs to be communicated to voters, I mean, frankly, it all comes down to those kitchen table issues, right? People care most about what directly affects them. That's how much your groceries cost. That's what your rent is. That's how much you're paying for a car or what daycare is. That also is for certain people, healthcare related issues too, such as abortion. So, if they're able to hit more on how they're able to make changes with respect to those specific topics for voters, I mean, that's what the next, we have fewer than 60 days until the actual election. You can expect to hear them continue to hammer on those points throughout.
Yeah, I think for Kamala Harris in particular, one of the deficits that she faces as a candidate now is that she entered the race so late, and that as the sitting vice president, one of the lines of attack that Donald Trump has had against her is that, why aren't you doing all the things that you're going to say you're going to do now? And so she really has to thread that needle and provide a message that really directly addresses people's concerns about economic insecurity, and then also talks about her plans to address them to ameliorate those issues in a way that doesn't necessarily throw the current president under the bus, but also shows that she's going to make some sort of departure from the current administration.
Sorry, Simon,
no,
I didn't mean
please.
to interrupt. I was just going to say, to your exact point, though, that's why you're starting to see Trump mention IVF a little bit more and start to dial in on reproductive issues, is because the Harris campaign has pegged him as, being against reproductive rights and against wanting to take away these abilities for Americans to have, even if you live in a state like Michigan, where it is quote unquote settled law. So, you're going to start to see them almost cross-pollinate with each other's ideas to prove, hey, I'm not as left or as right as my opponent is making me out to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
You saw that a little bit on the debate stage last week, actually, where Trump and Harris tried to differentiate themselves from each other, or in some instances say that their ideas are similar. What are voters saying about these two candidates after the debate last week?
Well, there were some instant polls that was taken of independent voters, and I know Harris, both from the punditry and some voters, said that she did very well and did better than Trump. But there have not been the big national polls that we've typically leaned upon from the Washington Post and CBS and from the New York Times. So we don't necessarily know if there's been a direct impact. There clearly was a groundswell of support from, like I mentioned, punditry, that Harris had done very well. But I mean, one of the things that we're going to talk about probably a little later, that one of the things that everyone talks about as being a big deal, besides immigration, is inflation and the economy. And you can tell it's an Achilles heel for them, because she basically didn't answer the very first question of the debate, in which the moderator asked her, what do you say to those people? And she decided not to answer that question. So, I mean, that non-answer to me tells me that they realize that is a problem for them, because the economy has caused them trouble. And well, it has caused a lot of people trouble.
You mentioned she didn't answer that question directly. Shortly after the debate aired, international pop star Taylor Swift endorsed Harris. Political parties have for a long time tried to engage young voters. Are there any indications that Taylor Swift's photo with her cat and her endorsement is going to make a difference for young voters?
Well, I think the goal is they really want her to. And the reason is there's the number 284 is the big deal. She has 284 million followers on Instagram, where she posted that message. Trump's wanted her endorsement so bad, he reposted a fake social media posting of her endorsing him. And then immediately, or shortly thereafter, that she had supported Harris, he wrote, "I hate Taylor Swift." So to them, they know it's important. In 2016, 39% of young people voted in the election. That was 11 percentage points or more behind what had happened during the two Obama election victories in 08 and 12. And it was behind what happened in 2020, when 50% of the young people voted. So they know it's an important group, that if they can motivate them, they will hopefully lean to their side. And again, she's just so popular with just a broad swath of the electorate that it makes sense why they would want her. I mean, look what she's done for the NFL, one of the world's biggest sports leagues. You think, how many more people can like the NFL? Well, apparently a lot more, because she's, boyfriend or girlfriend with Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. It's kind of amazing.
Well, and to that point, there was some numbers that came out immediately after her endorsement, which suggested about 338,000 people were actually driven to vote.gov following that endorsement. Now, I do want to stress it's not necessarily a one-to-one. I saw some kind of misleading media reports that suggested that, 338,000 people registered to vote. Vote.gov just lets you check your registration. You can register to vote from there. So I'm not certain if it's, a precise one-to-one. But that's a lot of people who are now looking into, am I registered to vote in this jurisdiction, or how can I register to vote in this jurisdiction? And it does a lot for, like we put it out, the younger crowd. But it's, it's not just Gen Z and millennials. There's been a number of people who've come out in support of Harris. Aubrey Plaza, it's from Parks and Rec, also posted a childish cat lady photo of herself. Not so much of a prominent endorsement, but Stevie Nicks of Fleetwood Mac fame reposted an image of herself with her dog, not necessarily naming Harris specifically in her support, but saying that she was a childless dog lady, and urging her fans to go out and vote. So you're seeing this kind of broadly across the spectrum of pop stars kind of coming out in support of Harris. Whether that is going to make a difference, though, that is really key, right? Because we see that there are demographics that this campaign has been struggling with. For instance, Black men come to mind. I'm not saying that Black men can't also love Taylor Swift, but what I am saying is that that is an endorsement that speaks to a very specific swath of voters. And if it is the voters that she needs to be reaching, great. But there are definitely a larger sect that's not going to capture that. While this endorsement is huge for them, it still does leave a lot of ground to be covered.
Yeah, I think that this really shows the tussle over the pop culture mainstream that we're having in this presidential election. I think 2008 was sort of a wake-up call for Republicans when Barack Obama's campaign was able to so dominate and bring in all of these A-list celebrities and people from Hollywood to sort of work as celebrity surrogates for him. And Democrats have maintained that momentum, but I think that Republicans have also done a good job of playing a lot of catch-up and understanding what it takes to tap into that culture. You saw it when former President Donald Trump was in Detroit back in June. We had prominent Detroit rappers there on the scene supporting him and endorsing him, putting that out on their social media channels, showing that they're sort of tapping into this as well. But I think one of the struggles that Democrats in particular are facing is that, unlike in 2020, the messages about some of these issues that for college students really matter, like climate change, housing affordability, these aren't really taking center stage as much in this election. And so what I think we're seeing is some efforts from the campaign to try to head this off. When I saw Tim Walz speak in East Lansing last week, he came and he was talking explicitly about those issues because it's something that they care about. But if Democrats can't generate that turnout in East Lansing and Ann Arbor, that's going to cut into their margins significantly because it was such a crucial part of their 2020 victory.
For sure. And we saw this, we saw this at the DNC with they having influencers there. We saw this in 2022 and 2020 when we were reporting on young voters. And it's something we're going to continue to look at and to see which parts of the demographics are actually being represented in these races. Mike, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but when Kamala Harris was asked at the debate if Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago, she did not directly answer the question. But we do have some data that shows how Michigan households are doing. What do we know?
Well, they're not, the nation as a whole is not doing as well as they were. Yes, like in Michigan in 2023, the median household income was $69,000. That's $10,000 more than it was a decade earlier. But if you adjust for inflation, that same household is now $2,000 below where they were just in 2019. That's 4 years ago. So the census data covers from 2019 to 2023, and that's what we looked at. And most the people who were hurt the most are those with the least education, and they didn't do as well. If you are older and you have a college degree, you are likely less affected by inflation. Maybe you don't have a car payment anymore. Maybe you don't even have a mortgage. And maybe you like the fact that you can get some money from your savings account that was not there 3 years ago. But for the average household, this has been a lot of pain. And I think a lot of people have kind of not ignored it, but I think Trump has zeroed in on it specifically because of how big this group is. Like the non-college educated is over 70% of the population. Well, they're the ones who are hurt the most. And even though inflation is down, prices are still high, and the pain is there. And I think we have to, consider that the average person isn't as doing as well as maybe those of us who have a college degree and have really good employment.
For sure. And we had a reader who asked for information about the different candidates' plans on education, healthcare, and federal debt. Let's do a quick compare and contrast. Simon, how do the two candidates compare on healthcare plans?
Yeah, if you look at the evolution of these two candidates who have a long political history, it's been a process of moving from the fringes towards a more centrist, more pragmatic approach. Originally, Trump wanted to repeal Obamacare, then repeal and replace. Now, both of those things are out of the window. Now he says that he'll make Obamacare much better. But doesn't really go into any details. One of the moments that sort of went viral from the debate last week was that he said that he just simply had concepts of a plan for what he wants to do in healthcare, not necessarily a plan ready to go. And at the same time, Kamala Harris, she's somebody who had really long, ambitious plans. When she was first running for president in 2020, she had said that she first wanted a public option for Medicaid and then would transition over a 10-year period to Medicaid for all. That's out of the window. But still, the Trump campaign is using this to talk about how she wants to be a quote unquote communist for healthcare and force everybody into this public option. But she's no longer pushing this plan. Instead, she's sort of nibbling at the margins. She's talking about lowering prescription drug prices, lowering the cost of insulin, and sort of continuing the work of the Biden administration, including trying to shore up Medicare and Medicaid to the extent that they are able to. But again, this has been a campaign that's been marked by light on details in terms of policy and more about the general direction of the country. And so we haven't gotten a lot of real nitty-gritty details from these campaigns about what specific policies they have proposed.
Well, and Isabel, I hate to flip the script here, but you are our education reporter. So I'm actually curious, like, what you would say are the big differences between Trump and Harris when it comes to education more specifically.
Yeah, we did a piece last week about the Trump campaign wants to eliminate the federal Department of Education. That's part of the Republican platform. That's one of their main things. They also want to do universal school choice. On the Harris side of things, they are leaning into their wins related to student debt relief. They support the U.S. Department of Education and they oppose school vouchers. Of course, a lot of this is going to matter in the nitty-gritty details, right? Even if you eliminate the federal Department of Education, there's still a lot of programs within it that might stay. And when you look at those student loan relief plans that the Harris and the Biden team has been touting, a lot of that has been stopped in the courts. So a lot of those loans have not actually been forgiven.
And,
I'm happy to go ahead.
Oh, I had a quick question. I mean, hasn't the Department of Education been a pinata for Republicans for like just election after election? Why do they hate it so much?
I mean, you're right. This is not the first time that Republicans are saying that the Department of Education should be eliminated. I think Project 2025, which is a conservative-backed plan that Trump has disavowed, they have very specific things that they want to see. They want to see, for example, the Title IX restrictions, which relate to gender identity and sexual orientation. They want to see that reversed. They have ideas for how they want to see enforcement over special education law be brought into a different part of the federal government. So I think it's a really right time for people to critique the Department of Ed, not only on the Title IX stuff, but also on the FAFSA stuff. When you look at college students who were applying to college or their families who were applying in this last cycle, it was a mess. Everything took a long time. Schools were complaining. So it's actually a time where you might be able to get people on both sides of the aisle to say, we don't need this department.
Man,
it's interesting though, because it's interesting to see though, because at the same time, Michigan and a lot of other states, most of these education decisions are made on the state and the local level. So a lot of these things that Republicans are critical of, for example, critical race theory, which they've said a lot about, or the way that schools are talking about gender, a lot of that stuff is already decided on the local level and the state level. And if you want to change curriculum, you need to go to your local school board. That's not a federal government issue. Kind of flipping back to host position, we had a reader, Kyle, who wanted to know what state house incumbent do you believe is the most likely to lose in the general election?
Yeah, so I can tackle this. Just so for readers that aren't aware, the state house right now is a narrow majority from Democrats. They hold 56 seats compared to Republicans 54. So 1 to 2 seats flipping alters the balance of power. It's been a while, a little over 2 decades since there's been a 55-55 split. But again, that would upend the ability for this Democratic trifecta in state government to pass a budget with all their priorities in order. So there's a handful of different races that we're going to be looking at. One of them is in the Upper Peninsula, Jen Hill, who represents Marquette, the home of Northern Michigan University, won only by about 2,500 votes 2 years ago. She's running against, I believe, Carl Bonack, who's a weatherman who's well known up there, local TV broadcast. Both of them have already begun airing TV ads. There's millions of dollars in caucus PACs that's going to be spent on some of these races. Another one that I think is particularly close is going to be Democratic Rep Jamie Churches of Wyandotte. She's representing a downriver community that's very swingy. Generally, I think perhaps even leaning Republican. She won by just 660 votes in 2022, and Democrats made big gains. So that really shows just how tight that race is going to be. She's going up against Republican challengers Riley Linting, who is the youth vice chair of the Michigan Republican Party. So someone who has some visibility in the community, at least politically so far. And you've seen some of the attention that Democrats have given this district. Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed the 2023-2024 fiscal year budget in her district to try to highlight some of the gains that Democrats have given. They've gotten a lot of special earmark projects there. So those are just a couple of the two that spring to mind.
Thanks for that, Simon. We've got just a couple more questions, but if you have a reader question that you want to throw in the chat, we will also get to this. We've talked a lot about Trump and Harris, but there is a presidential election where RFK is still going to be on the ballot. He's still trying to get his name off the ballot. Simon or Jordan, can you explain where that stands?
Yeah, so he's actually going to be back in court Tuesday to argue that he should be removed from Michigan's ballots. If you've at all been keeping up with this, it's been a ping pong, really, of is he or isn't he going to be on the ballot. Effectively, the state is claiming that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he was nominated by, I believe it was Michigan's Natural Law Party earlier this year in April. He cannot rescind his name from the ballot once he's accepted the nomination, which I know people brought up was, well, why can't he get off when Biden was able to get off? Well, Biden was able to get off because he wasn't actually ever confirmed as the Democratic nominee. Remember, Kamala Harris ended up accepting that nomination at the DNC. So RFK did accept the Natural Law Party's nomination. He dropped out last month through his support behind former President Donald Trump and his campaign, and since then has been arguing that it will disenfranchise voters if he stays on Michigan's ballots. The state is saying, no, sorry, you've accepted the nomination. RFK has gone back and forth. He, one set of courts said that the state was right. Another set of courts said the state was wrong. Most recently, the Michigan Supreme Court said that the ballots are going to stay as is. And that's especially because ballot printing has already begun in a lot of counties. That's going to be a huge cost to the state if they have to now either rescind or throw out and start reprinting these ballots. Not to mention, a lot of these ballots need to be finalized by this week, which is why this is happening in such a short period of time. Is military and absentee ballots go out this weekend. I believe the finalized absentee ballots have to be ready and stamped and ready to go by Thursday. So, what's going on? I guess we really don't know. Like I said, there is going to be a court decision tomorrow, or the courts are going to hear him tomorrow. And what happens from there, I guess we'll just have to see.
Right. And we regularly update our website with these things. We have an elections tracker that's updated pretty much every single day with new updates. So if you're really keen on this issue, you should check our website out. I want to end on this question. We got a reader who wants to hear more about what undecided voters in Michigan are saying. I think it's easy from our vantage point to know what the camps are saying, what the different campaigns are saying, and what the diehard supporters are saying when we see them at their rallies. But I want to open this up to anyone who has talked to an undecided voter recently. What are they saying about the election at this point?
Sure. So I talked to some voters in the 8th Congressional District, which comprises Flint, Saginaw, Bay City, and Midland over the past couple of weeks. And a lot of them who have not yet made up their minds are fatigued. They're exhausted by this election season, which has dragged on for many, many months at this point. Our elections do keep getting longer in terms of the length that presidential candidates campaign. And what is really hitting them hard and making this difficult to make them even want to show up at the polls is the sort of negativity and the catastrophizing from both sides about what would happen if their opponent is elected. They're looking for more constructive debates that talk more about solution-oriented problems. And for them, they're interested to see, who actually is going to come up with a plan, who has something that's going to directly impact their own lives. And this is something that I've heard repeatedly from different voters, and they've been left wanting, to be frank, so far in this campaign.
Yeah, Simon's right on the nose. I know that when I was talking to folks earlier this month as well, it's varied. A lot of it does kind of come down to, again, inflation. I talked to a lot of people who were saying, I want this to be over. Lots and lots of people said that they were just tired of hearing about the candidates, that they weren't necessarily hearing things that they wanted to be hearing about topics like, again, inflation, what was going to happen with grocery prices, things of that nature. So, that's the tricky thing with undecided voters, though, right? Is that they are not a monolith. We can't just say that all undecided voters want X or Y. So, some of them are still out there because they don't agree with the current way that the Israel-Gaza war is continuing to happen. And there are just some undecided voters who will not ever decide. They may end up just sitting this out. So it's really varied, but by and large, fatigue is the huge, don't want to use the word rainbow over this, but it is the big overarching thing over all of this, is that voters are tired. A lot of voters just want this to be over with already.
Yeah. One other thing I should note is that more well-to-do, more conservatively in communities like Midland, I talked to a number of voters who were essentially fiscal conservatives, people who were pretty socially moderate, but they cared about the national debt. They wanted to see a government that's not going to continue to increase the national deficit by trillions of dollars, as both the tax plans from both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are anticipated to do. And so they feel kind of homeless right now. There's not really sort of that more traditional conservatism that they're looking for, that's looking to shrink the size of government, but also reduce spending and get some of this runaway debt under control. And so they've been feeling pretty like they don't have a candidate that necessarily represents their views.
Yeah, and that's kind of the theme of this campaign, right? Is who is the candidate that's not going to make my life harder? Well, I actually don't know.
For sure, for sure. Well, we're going to continue to talk to voters over the next several weeks. As we've referenced a couple of times, absentee voting starts relatively soon. We also have the new early in-person voting law that's in place, and we're going to continue to be on the campaign trail. Trump will be here this week. Harris will be here this week. Bridge will be at both of these events this week. So we want to continue to educate and answer questions about the election. We've covered a lot today. We've covered everything from the assassination attempt on President Donald Trump to if Taylor Swift is going to be able to influence the election, and sort of what's next for everyone and for the Michigan economy. If you want more election updates, you can go to our website, bridgemi.com. You can sign up for our free Politics Watch newsletter. That's also where our free elections tracker and our nonpartisan voter guide is. We'd also love for you to hit the subscribe button on YouTube. That helps us reach you, and it helps you make sure that you never miss a video from us. And we will see you next week. Thank you.